Hello everyone, it's Steve with Aptera Owners Club. Several weeks ago, this YouTube channel called The Compound, it has these two guys that do some finance talk. I've never heard of them before, but they had this very interesting guest named Nick Colas. And it was a really interesting interview. The whole interview is like an hour and a half long, but there's about 10 minutes of it that's talking about Tesla. And I thought there were some things that were relevant to Aptera, and I thought that we would watch it together and kind of talk about it together. So Nick Colas, if you're wondering who he is the co-founder of something called Data Trek Research. I think it's an investment analysis firm, and the daily guide to markets, data, and disruption. And he has been an automotive analyst for much of his career, starting back in 1991 when he was at Credit Suisse, and then he was the automotive sector person for SAC Capital and then Roche Securities. So he is pretty well versed in the automotive industry, and he had a lot to say about Tesla. Some of the things he said is kind of crazy sounding to me. And I've always thought that Tesla is way overvalued in terms of their market capitalization compared to what they do. But there were some interesting points that he made. And I just thought it was a pretty fascinating interview for this like kind of 10-minute segment. So I thought if you want to watch it together, I will link this entire video if you want to watch the whole 1.5 hour segment. These guys seem to have very good commentary, and so if you're interested in like financial analysis and that kind of stuff, it seems like a pretty good channel.
So I think of Tesla. I think of Tesla in kind of a duality with Apple, and there are two different types of companies. Apple is a sustaining innovator, like we were talking about. They constantly improve new products by a little, and this is the Clayton Christensen model of disruption. He calls those sustaining innovators. They just keep trying to move up the value chain, charge a little bit more, create new things, but they don't create new. Tesla is the paragon of new, and you know it from the valuation.
Like revolution, not evolution.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. And Tesla's valuation is like 800 billion. So let's just say that we only know that two car companies will survive over the next 20 years, Toyota and Tesla.
Okay, I want to stop right there. All right, well, that was the first crazy thing he said, that he thinks that there's only two car companies that are going to survive, Toyota and Tesla. I mean, I think that sounds crazy, but maybe he's right. The other thing that he said was he was talking about Apple and Tesla and how Apple is kind of a evolutionary company. It kind of like improves on things, but Tesla does completely new things. And in that metric, if you think of Aptera, Aptera is more like Tesla than Apple, if you think about it. Aptera is not trying to refine or improve something that's already out there. It has a completely new thing. I mean, if he thinks that Tesla is doing something revolutionary, then I mean, what would he think of something like Aptera? You know, it's like completely different. It's got three wheels, it's got solar, it's hyper efficient, it's super light. It's made out of composite structure. It's not even made the same way as other current vehicles. It is completely new. So if he wants a definition of new, then he's thinking Aptera. But okay, so his contention is there's only two car companies that are going to survive over the next 20 years, and that's Tesla and Toyota. And so he thinks that the other companies are dead. All right, well, let's keep listening.
Seriously, we all know that?
Yeah.
Is that consensus? Is that why Ford and GM sell at 5 times earnings?
Yes. I did a video on this, and I got a call from somebody I didn't know had known for a while, but then lost touch with, who's now a senior guy at Stellantis.
Okay.
This is Chrysler and...
Yeah, was he like, Nick, can you stop?
No, he said, why does my stock trade for a 3 PE? And I said, because the market...
You ain't Elon Musk, son.
Because the market thinks you're going to be dead in 10 years.
Yeah.
That's the sum total.
Okay, so you think 10 years. Sorry, I thought he said 20 years, but he's thinking they're going to be dead in 10 years. I find that highly unlikely. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below.
Same with Ford, same with GM.
Yeah.
That's why you have those. I mean, look, when I covered the group, it was 10 to 12 times earnings.
Yeah.
Now it's 5.
But you're saying you think that's right. You think the market is right.
I think the market's more right than wrong. So the thing about those two comps is Toyota trades for, call it 200, 250, 300 market cap.
Outselling Tesla in units by a lot.
And Tesla trades for 8. So there's a gap of 500. So why does the market give Tesla a $500 billion premium to the best car company in the world?
And this is the question I always ask. Like, how is Tesla worth more than Toyota? It makes no sense to me, but this is his explanation for it.
Tweets?
No, brand though.
Because they think they're going to be around.
Yeah.
And because of autonomous driving.
Okay. and none of the other companies are going to adopt the same technology that Tesla does.
Look at what happened with charging, right? Tesla developed a charging system.
They won. They won that war.
And they won that war.
They beat the government, right? I think the federal government wanted a certain standard.
Yeah.
And now it's going to be Teslas instead.
Right. So imagine that as a little tiny slice of a story, and then put AV technology on top of it. Same.
So I don't think the government wanted CCS. Just CCS was the opened plug at that time that many people were multiple car companies could use. So they wanted whatever multiple car companies could use. That was their stipulation. And at that time, NACS was only used by Tesla. But yeah, it's true. Tesla won the plug war. That is an absolutely true statement. It is very clear now that NACS is the standard in North America.
Kind of thing. So you have Apple being sustaining, Tesla being disruptive, and I always chart like how's Tesla doing over 50 days versus Apple, and the peak for Tesla relative to Apple was end of July, right at the peak of the S&P.
Wait, is there a world where GM and Ford write down their investments in their own self-driving and just adopt FSD from Tesla?
If they can't develop it, sure.
Well, I mean, it's conceivable.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that is why those stocks are being so severely discounted, is that there's like, at this point, survival risk. How does that square with GM having to negotiate with the union every 2 or 3 years? And I mean, it's because Tesla doesn't have to do that. So is it just innovation, or is it just like, look at all the natural advantages this newer company has versus the incumbents? It's got to be a part of it, right?
It's definitely a part of it. Like I used to go to Solidarity House in Detroit, UAW headquarters, when I was an auto analyst. And it's a different world there. And that's the world that GM and Ford and Chrysler have to interface with.
Still. Forever.
I think there's going to be a strike.
They also have to deal with.
All right. So they're talking about the advantage of not having to deal with legacy things like the automotive unions and things like that. And that's another thing that Aptera does not have to deal with. Does not have to deal with any of those legacy things and the legacy suppliers or the automotive workers union. And
with the dealerships.
Yes.
Which is a whole other can of worms that Tesla's not dealing with.
Look, if you do like a classic Porter analysis of the car companies, they have pressure from every single part of the Porter square: suppliers, customers, dealers, substitutes, competitors.
Well, now Elon's putting more pressure on.
Well, so now dealerships are another thing that Tesla doesn't have to deal with, and neither does Aptera. And what he's talking about is Porter. Remember, we talked about Michael Porter in that video about blue ocean, red ocean strategies. This is Porter's 5 forces model, and this is how you do the analysis of the competitive landscape. And he's saying that the legacy auto workers have they have to deal with all of these things: threat of new entrants, threat of substitutes, so something that's not a car being introduced, rivalry among existing competitors, that's true, bargaining power of suppliers, that's very strong, and bargaining power of buyers, that's the customer, and also the dealers. So the buyers of the legacy car makers are both us, the ultimate buyers of the car, and the dealers. They have to deal with both. Now, Tesla is now kind of more of an established company, so it has to deal with this threat of new entrants, threat of substitutes, rivalry among existing competitors. And they have less bargaining power suppliers because they're more vertically integrated, I think, and they don't have to deal with dealerships. Now, if you look at Aptera, there is no threat of new entrants into Aptera because Aptera is the new entrant. There's no threat of substitutes because Aptera potentially is the substitute, because it's possible that a 3-wheeled light vehicle is going to substitute for regular cars. And other substitutes would be like e-bikes, e-motorcycles, velomobiles maybe, walking, public transit, that kind of stuff. But there's a lot fewer substitutes. There's no existing competitors to Aptera, and the bargaining power of suppliers is low at this point because they're just working with one supplier and they're a startup. And again, they don't have to deal with dealerships. So a lot of these advantages, I think Aptera has bigger advantages than Tesla does.
So I'll be curious to hear your take on the rapid price cuts. The Model S started the year at $105,000. Now it's down to $75,000. I mean, dramatic price cuts on the S and the X. Is this genius, or is this because there's a lack of demand? In other words,
that is impressive. If you look at this, that is a $40,000 price cut on the Model X. in this year, and a $30,000 price cut on the Model S. Now, the Model Y and 3 have had less price cuts than this, but yeah, those are impressive.
Is Elon crowning out potential competitors?
He is, because a piece of that 250 of Tesla of Toyota valuation in Tesla comes down to staying alive. You have to be relevant. You have to continue to hold your market share, because if the next phase of the game is autonomous, you have to be there at the end of EVs to get to autonomous. So he has to maintain and grow market share.
So does this signal this? So this does not signal desperation, lack of demand. This signals he's playing from a position of strength.
He is. Look, the auto industry globally is one of the most horribly structured industries I have ever seen.
Yeah.
Because literally everything that can go wrong with an industry goes wrong.
Yeah.
Mostly overcapacity. I mean, the global auto industry has capacity for 40% more cars than there is demand.
So that is a fact that I did not know. Now, I did not go verify this, and I couldn't figure out how to verify it. I tried to verify it, but I couldn't verify it. But he says that there's way more capacity than there is demand. And that may be true. And I think demand for personal automobiles may be going down, at least in developed nations. I mean, if you look at the Gen Z in America, they are less interested in having car ownership. They're very happy to just Uber around everywhere and take public transit if needed, especially the more urban Gen Z. And so I think the time of multiple vehicle ownership and cars being a large part of someone's identity is probably over. And so if that's the case, I see that as a potential problem. And if that's true, I definitely see a lot of car companies going bankrupt.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And partly they're a victim of their own success. They've made the car, as we were talking about before, they've made it so that the cars last longer.
Yes. So your scrappage rates go down, and so your replacement rates go down.
And another thing that made me think about is that the Aptera, they don't have a capacity problem. In fact, they have a low capacity problem because for the foreseeable future, they have way more demand than they have capacity to produce. So that may work in their favor.
Right.
John, can we chart on, please, to the next point? This is from Drew Dixon, who is a value investor. He likes to talk about Tesla. Okay, he said, in these now famous charts comparing Tesla's fundamentals and market cap to other automakers, I have excluded BYD for long enough. Well, I don't even know what's BYD.
The Chinese battery electric car maker.
The Buffett stock.
So
he sold it, right? Buffett. I think Berkshire sold out of it, but yeah. Okay.
So we're looking at automaker market caps in one chart, and Tesla is now market cap wise as large as Toyota, BYD, Porsche, Mercedes, BMW.
Look at this chart. This chart is insane. This is the market capitalization of all these car manufacturers, and Tesla is like worth all of them. This kind of reminds me of the graph if you look at like US defense spending and every other countries in the world defense spending kind of looks like this. Like this is the United States, and the rest of the world combined spends about as much as the United States. This is like Tesla is worth as much as Toyota, BYD, Porsche, Mercedes, BMW, Volkswagen, Honda, Ferrari, Stellantis, GM combined. And then if you look at sales, so revenue, this is the revenue of those companies, and this is the revenue of Tesla. So Tesla has 1/4 the revenue of Toyota or Volkswagen, yet they're worth more than all of these put together, which I'd never understood this. This didn't make any sense to me.
BMW, Volkswagen, Honda, Ferrari, Stellantis, and GM. The next chart is revenue. And I don't know, is that in trillions? What is that? 1.7, whatever it was. Whatever it is. All of these companies are like, I don't know, 10x of Tesla, and they're the same market cap.
Yep. Dead, alive.
That's simple.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Wait, hold on. When you say dead, like literally?
That's what I want. Like bankruptcy dead, or just like moribund businesses that never grow?
Yeah, melting ice cube or out of business?
When the economies of the world are okay, they can survive. It's the next two recessions that will kill them.
Why?
Because demand goes down for autos roughly 30 to 40% in a recession. And that's when you lose the ability to have free cash flow and reinvest. And if you're having to reinvest for EVs, you lose all that cash flow. So you slowly slip away.
Nick, a normal industry would consolidate given this picture and given these multiples. Not that it would necessarily save them, because we've seen that with the airlines, we've seen that with steel companies, but like these companies seem to be like very fiercely their own brand, their own world. It doesn't seem like any of them would really have that. Like, I'm just going down the list. Stellantis is a bunch of mergers, so put that one aside. Nobody's buying Ferrari. Ferrari, by the way, the stock is fine. I almost would argue it's a luxury good.
It is.
It doesn't even belong in this.
Yeah.
Okay. Honda, Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes, Porsche. These are.
And I wonder, like, if Aptera kind of can be thought of that way. It's possible that Aptera becomes something like Ferrari, but just not as expensive. Like, not a luxury good, but an efficiency good. A good for the smaller proportion of the population that really gets what Aptera is about, and they don't really have to compete. That's kind of like the blue ocean strategy that they're talking about. Like, you don't really have to compete as a commodity transportation good, but it's its own thing that people appreciate for what it is. So it doesn't have to compete as a kind of commodity good.
I don't know, 75 to 100-year-old brands. They're not doing deals with each other to survive. They don't look at the situation they're in as a survival situation.
Yeah.
Is that just because it's too early for them to even be able to understand what's happening to them?
I think they all feel they would need to try. They had to try. And particularly like Ford. Ford is still family controlled.
Yeah.
And the family wants to have that brand. Look, GM had the wisdom to sell their European operations years ago. Ford still runs Ford of Europe because the family doesn't want to let go of the franchise in Europe. Okay. So there is a lot of tension there.
The Japanese companies don't come here and acquire U.S. automakers. They just sell autos.
Right.
That's all they need to do. Like, you're not going to have that kind of cross-border thing to the extent that you would expect in this industry environment.
And to your point, culture is a huge point. Like, one of the last things I did at First Boston was we were the advisor to Chrysler when they sold to Daimler.
Yeah.
And that was one of the worst mergers of all time.
I remember. Was that 98?
Yeah.
I remember that.
One of the worst mergers of all time, and the cultural differences between the two businesses were profound.
It's like Lee Iacocca, Chrysler.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, Bob Eaton was the chairman at the time, but he'd taken over from Lee.
But it was Lee. But it was like Lee's culture that he had built.
It was Lutz's culture, really.
Yeah,
This hard driving car guy. Do the right thing, advertise, market the hell out of everything.
Yeah.
Versus Daimler, which is we make the best cars in the world.
Yeah.
And that just never worked, and it was so obvious from day one, and it never got better.
Nick, traditional value investors look at that chart that Drew just threw up, and they can't understand in what world this makes sense.
Okay, so I must be a traditional value investor because I can't believe in what world it makes sense.
You obviously have a background in automotive, so you understand where this is. Do you think that most auto analysts would agree with you, or would they agree with the value investors, or is it somewhere in between?
I think they would want to agree with the value investors because the stocks are cheap. And there is a pathway, which I think you outlined, where the world can reassemble itself so that some of these companies can survive and create shareholder value. But because of those limitations you talked about, cultural, technological, the chances are very unlikely.
I want to ask you, I remember 5 years ago, the knock on Tesla was that you don't understand how hard it is to manufacture cars at scale. They've never done it. This was the PayPal guy. He's never built shit at scale. He has no idea how to do it.
Okay, so this is kind of what is being said about Aptera at this point. They don't know how to build. Sure, they have good ideas. Sure, they have a good prototype. They can't build at scale. They don't know what they're doing. This is a very similar narrative.
And that's why GM and Ford are going to be the winners of the electric revolution, because they might be late to the game, but they know how to make a ton of cars and sell a lot of cars. That narrative during the pandemic went out the window. Elon out-executed. Like, say whatever you want about him and his tweeting, or I don't care about any of that stuff. He did figure out how to be a really good car manufacturer, and he did that better than the incumbent automakers figured out how to be as revolutionary as he is.
So if you think about that, one of the things that you see, one of the major things that you see Tesla doing is going to gigacasting to make their body structure a lot easier and cheaper to manufacture. And gigacasting is essentially what Aptera is doing with the SMC stuff, but they're doing it with aluminum and Aptera is doing with composite, and it's just reducing part count and making things easier to put together.
In other words, he did a very hard thing that nobody thought he could do. And for me, that's when the narrative on Tesla changed on a dime. It's what a lot of the shorts weren't counting on. He started shipping a lot of cars. I remember he did an interview with Kara Swisher after he had spent like 3 months sleeping in the manufacturing facility. And maybe some of that was played up, but the guy figured out how to make and sell a lot of cars.
Yeah.
And so once he was able to do that, then the incumbent's advantage of, for decades, we've been producing millions of cars, that was gone. So then what was their advantage? I feel like that was the moment where the writing was on the wall.
You're right. And yes, you're right. The challenge, like you go through an auto plant, and just like the paint booth, a paint booth is $1 billion of CapEx.
Okay, so that's something that we've heard Sandy Monroe and Chris Anthony say about paint. The reason that Aptera is not going to be painted is because a paint shop is $1 billion of capital expenditure. And so that's why they went with the wrap instead of with paint. And so that's something that they're bringing up right now.
Like there's no room for error. You have to get that right.
What's a paint booth?
The paint booth is where a raw car in steel goes through and gets painted. And it's an incredibly complex process. And it's because of emissions and regulations, it's also a very expensive process. And getting it right, you can notice like Tesla doesn't have that many colors in their portfolio. There's a reason for that. It's a very complex process.
Ah, interesting.
So even just that, and you're right, to produce at scale is tremendously hard.
Yeah.
And he did it.
They didn't think he would be able to teach himself to lead the firm to be able to do it.
I didn't think he could do it.
Well, most people didn't. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what the hardcore car guys got mostly wrong. That somebody could come out of nowhere and actually produce enough cars to sustain the business.
Yeah.
Like nobody said that he couldn't design a great car, but like it was obvious that
They
he
didn't
could.
think he could deliver enough.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the big change.
Remember, for a time, they were making cars in tents,
Yes.
right? In
Whatever
a
it
tent,
took.
like a massive tent.
Yeah.
And it worked out all right.
It's pretty crazy.
And the
It was
answer against
amazing.
him, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the end of the segment about automobiles. And like I said, a lot of crazy things. Tesla and Toyota are the only two car manufacturers that are going to be alive in 10 years. That is crazy. And then that chart showing revenue versus market capitalization was insane. And but I thought there were a lot of cool parallels between Tesla and Aptera. And tell me what you guys think about his statements, his predictions. I thought it was a very interesting interview, so I thought I'd share it with you guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm really interested in what you guys think about it. All right. Have a good day.